Hi everyone, I wanted to follow up where we left off in class with a little video so that if you're having trouble doing the Excel stuff for histograms and frequency tables, you can have a reference point over this long weekend. So I'm working off the directions that are in the class notes for 2.1 and 2.2. I'm going to start where we left off in class with creating a frequency table from a data set. So that's what this looks like in the notes. So I've got my data set open. Again, this earthquakes data we got from the textbook, and it's in D2L. If you downloaded it, make sure you do this enable editing button so that you can actually type in here. Move my screen back over. All right. So we looked at, we've got, I think it was 600 different earthquakes with their magnitudes and depths. And we want to make first a frequency table. So we talked about in class, we need to determine the upper class limits that we want our data table to have. So if we wanted to start these classes with a class width of 0.5 and starting at 1, we said that we know the first class will be 1 until something. The next one would be starting at 1.5 and up, and then 2 and up, and so on. We realized that we needed to know how big these numbers get in order to know how many little classes to make. So we did that using a function. So I'm just going to call this maximum, just a little label there. And then our function that we used was equal sign, which tells Excel that we're going to put in a formula here, and we're going to use the maximum function. So I'm typing max, and then an open parentheses, and then we need to tell Excel what we want the maximum of. So just for simplicity, I can click the A above this first column, and that will highlight the entire first column, so I don't have to click and drag all the way down on Excel. So I can do the max of this whole column. I'll just type another parentheses. So it tells me that the maximum magnitude was 4.69. So my classes, I'm going to go back and edit this one by typing in the formula bar, clicking there and typing. Next one would be 3 to something, 3.5 to something, 4 to something, 4.5. And then 5 will be the highest that I need. Remember that the class width of 0.5 means the difference between each starting point and then the ending points, and this is what we really need for Excel. I need to know, okay, if the next class here is going to start at 1.5, let's make this go to, I'll say 1.49, right? I need a number just before 1.5. And then my next one, and you know what? I just realized our data has 2 decimal places, so to be safe, let me do 1.499 just to make it extra clear when we're going to go from one to the other. I don't think that will actually make much difference here, but just to be sure I don't have any overlap or any data values that aren't sure where they're going to go. So I'm going to the number kind of right before each class. Each next class will begin. 3.499, 3.999. And notice that when I already have something typed in the cell, if I want to edit it, I need to click in the formula bar first. Otherwise, it'll just type right over it. Okay, so these are my actual classes down below here. Now, in order for Excel to make a frequency table, we need to actually give it a list of what the upper class limits are. So you'll notice that in the instructions. So I'm going to make a column here of just the upper class limits that I typed out. I actually don't even need this first column at all, but it was easier for me to write them out first and then decide what the upper class limits are. Okay, so I've just completed step 3 in the directions in our notes. Step 4, I'm going to click the Data tab in the ribbon, so that's up here, Data, and click Data Analysis towards the right. So this is that Data Analysis tool pack. If you're not seeing this button here, it means you need to enable the Data Analysis tool pack, so go up to the instructions for that, which were right above where we're looking right now in the notes. Okay, and we want to select histogram, so that's this one right here, and I'll do OK. Now we need to put the input range. Now the input range is all of our data, so that would be these numbers in column A here. Now unfortunately I can't do like I did before and just click A, because Excel is going to get confused when it sees this first box that says magnitude, and it's going to say, hey, this isn't even a number. So I do have to actually come in here, I'm going to click on the box, and I'm going to have to scroll all the way down. You can kind of wiggle your mouse like I'm doing here down below to keep it scrolling. And I have to scroll all the way down until I can highlight all the data. So I'm holding down the mouse button to do this. You can see this little green dotted line going around. Should be getting close. There we go. Okay, so there's the end of my data. You'll see that it's put this range in here starting at A2 to A601. Those are the boxes we want. And then the bin range, this is going to be those upper class limits that we wrote down. So I'm going to come over here to the scroll bar, scroll all the way back up. I'll move this box so I can see. And so for the bin range, I'll click into this bin range box, and now I'm going to highlight these upper class limits. Okay, so there's my bin range. If you leave this spot blank, Excel will make its own bins, but typically we want specific bin ranges, so we've got to put that in there. Now if I go down to output options, this is going to tell Excel where do I want to put this table that it's going to make. I'll just do a new worksheet, and that's going to add a new tab into my data set here. I'll just call it frequencies, or you can come up with a different name. And then I'm also going to click the box that says chart output, and that's going to put the histogram in there as well as the frequency table. Okay. Okay, so I click OK. It's going to create, notice here's 21th earthquakes, that was my data. If I click on that tab, it takes me back to where I was. But now I have a new tab called frequencies. This first chart here, this has my frequencies. Now notice the bins here is only listing those upper class limits. So really, if we're going to want this to be our final result, we need to come in here and put the actual numbers. And I actually already typed these in, so I could either do 1.00 to that and just kind of type them in one by one, or I can come back to the table because I've actually already typed these out. So I'm going to copy, highlight these cells here. If I right click with the right mouse button, I can do copy here, and then I'm going to click on the first box here, right click, and I'm going to do paste. There's lots of different paste options. It doesn't matter too much what you pick in this case. I'm going to do this paste values, and it'll just paste in the numbers I had already written. So now it's got my proper bins labeled, and then it has the frequency of each one. So now we can see 19 of the earthquakes had a magnitude between 1 and 1.499. 97 of them had magnitude between 1.5 and 1.999. Right? And you'll also see that these bins have gotten labeled on the histogram. I'm going to hide the ribbon so that we have a little bit more room here. So here's my histogram. You'll see that each of the bins are labeled. This is not really how we want a histogram to be labeled. We really want like these little tick marks on the horizontal axis labeled, but unfortunately Excel doesn't really make it that easy. One thing I do want to change is that histograms should always have the bars touching. They shouldn't be giving us these gaps unless our data types were categorical. So if these were like colors or something like that, it would make sense to have gaps. But to fix this, I'm going to click on the histogram, and you'll see that if you click on the chart, you get this chart tools up at the top. I'm going to go to, let's see, I believe it's the Format tab. No, it's the Design tab. So the Design tab under Chart Tools, and then I'm going to click this Quick Layout. Excel graphs have so many different options. You can change all the labels, you can change all the colors, you can change all different kinds of things. But this quick layout has some nice little samples. If you just hold your mouse over these different ones, it'll show you what all of these look like. So I noticed this one here has all of the columns touching, and I would prefer that. So I'm going to pick that one. Again, the bins are still not quite what we want, but it's going to be good enough for our purposes. The other thing I would also want to change here are the labels. So frequency is fine, that makes sense as a label, but I don't want to label this information bin because that doesn't really tell me anything. So I want to give this a label of what this actually is. In this case these are magnitudes. And I'm not sure what the units are here. I don't know if the data told us. Let me click enter here. Oops, I don't want that. I'll highlight that and delete. Okay, I'll just click away from that. So there's my magnitudes. I'm going to check the data on the earthquakes tab, and it doesn't say what these are. These are probably magnitudes on the Richter scale, but since I don't have units, I'll just leave it blank for now. And then I'm also going to change the title. So I'm just clicking on the title. I don't want to call it histogram. That's not very descriptive. So I'll say earthquake magnitudes. Okay. And that's really all the changes I'm going to make to this histogram. If you want to play around with more settings, you can go into some of the style and color options. You can play around with all different kinds of things in the design and formatting cases, but this is probably good enough for what we need it to do. I'm going to click this to make that go away. All right, so we've got our frequency table and we've got our histogram, and that's what we need Excel to do. Now you'll notice in the rest of the notes, I also talked about other types of frequency tables, relative frequency and cumulative frequency. I think that you can probably read through these on your own, but I will say something about the relative frequency table because this is something that's pretty handy. So the frequency table is just looking at, okay, we've got the earthquake magnitudes and then we've got the frequency of each one. Well, it's a little bit difficult to look at this data. You know, I can tell that the biggest bin, or the one with the most earthquakes in it, was this one, but it's a little bit hard to compare these. So what a relative frequency table does is, instead of saying how many, we're going to say what percentage. So in order to do this, I first need to know how many earthquakes there were total. Now we actually already know this because we already looked at the data and there were 600 earthquakes. But if we weren't sure, if we hadn't already counted them, then I can use another Excel function. So in this box at the bottom here, I'm going to put another equal sign to tell Excel I'm typing in a formula, and then I'm going to do sum. So the sum function is just going to add up all the numbers we put in it. So I'll do sum and then highlight all these different categories. This more category just means any data that happened to be bigger than 5.499, and there weren't any of those, so I don't need that. Okay, so there's my 600, just in case I didn't know. Then next to this category, I'm going to create a new column. I'm going to call this relative frequency. And for each of these, I'm going to have Excel compute something. So I'm going to do equal sign, and I want to take the frequency, so I'll click on the frequency box right next to it, and then I want to divide that by, so you use the slash to do division, 600. Now you can either type 600 in, or you can click on the 600 box. I'm going to type 600 in because it'll make my formulas a little bit easier. So if I press enter, here it gives me, okay, 19 divided by 600, this is 0.031667. Now, I would really like to have this as a percentage, right? This is basically 3%. And I can do that if I just click on the box, and then in your ribbon, we talked about this number formatting drop down. So I'll click on number formatting and I'm going to click percentage. So it automatically converts that. Okay, that's 3.17%. So 3.17% of the earthquakes fell into this first category. Now, Excel makes it really easy to do the rest of these. So I could just go through and type in equals and then click on this one and divide by 600. But Excel's pretty smart. So if I click on this first box and then grab the little corner that has this dot on it and click it and pull it all the way down, it will copy this formula and update it so that, for example, this box is saying, okay, look at B5 and divide it by 600, right? B5 is this box right next to it. So it's giving me, oops, undo. It's giving me all of these values. This would be the relative frequency. This gives us a good picture of, okay, 24% of the data falls in here, 31% in here, and so on. This is a little bit more useful than just a plain frequency table. If you have any questions about relative frequency or cumulative frequency, please send me an email over the weekend, or we can also look at some questions in class on Wednesday as well. All right, I hope this was helpful. Thanks.